this video, I'm going to discuss how the Hellenistic period changed the depiction of women in Greek and Roman art. But first, I would like to highlight the shift in their views on women by explaining how they viewed Etruscans, more particularly Etruscan women pre-Hellenistic period. I would also like to examine how the representation of Etruscan women in art was reflective of their position in society. Through this media, we can see how these societies chose to represent themselves to their observers. The representations represent their views on women and whether or not women should be seen as valued individuals that should take part in society. The lifestyle of Etruscan women was distinctly different than that of the Romans and Greeks. In a multitude of ways, we will be focusing on some of these differences between the lives of the Etruscan women and Roman and Greek women during the classical period before the Hellenistic period. While Etruscan women occupied a multitude of different spheres in their society, Greek and Roman women were confined mostly to the domestic sphere during the classical period. This way, they would be out of sight and out of mind. Etruscan women, in contrast, were quite social in comparison and were seen out in public quite often, attending different social events and participating in banquets and watching sporting events alongside the men. These inclusions in social life are immortalized in Etruscan artwork, a prime example being the sarcophagus with reclining couple from the necropolis in Cerviti, Italy. A necropolis is a large series of tombs where the dead are buried, and the word necropolis means city of the dead. Here the Etruscans buried their dead alongside their belongings, similarly to the Egyptians. The sarcophagus is made out of painted terracotta and depicts a married couple, husband and wife, lounging on a dining couch as if they were at a banquet. The woman looks as though she may have been holding a perfume flask or a pomegranate, and the man may have been holding an egg. They are relaxed, not stiff or incredibly formal, and their faces look animated and lively, as opposed to some of the more deadpan Greek statues of the classical period. This type of banquet imagery was often seen in Etruscan funerary artwork, including depictions of other sarcophagi. As stated before, in Greek and Roman society, women never attended banquets, so imagery like this would have not been found in Greek and Roman artwork. To quote the textbook Gardner's Art Throughout the Ages, it was so foreign to the Greeks that it both shocked and frightened them. Only men, boys, slave girls, and prostitutes attended Greek symposia. The wives remained at home, excluded from most aspects of public life. It makes sense that women attending banquets and sporting events would be considered unheard of amongst the Greeks and Romans because women were often confined to their homes and were only intended to birth babies and take care of them, and were not viewed as individual people but more as transactional property. Unsurprisingly, many Greek and Roman men were appalled by Etruscan women's behavior, such as Theopompus of Chios and Aristotle. Theopompus is quoted as observing that Etruscan women were expert drinkers and very good-looking, going on and then complaining that Etruscan women die not with their own husbands, but with any men who happen to be present. Ideology and status of women in ancient Greece describes the lives of Roman and Greek women during the classical period as follows. The women were regarded as a lower order of beings, neglected by nature in comparison with man, both in point of intellect and heart, incapable of taking part in public life, naturally prone to evil and fitted only for propagating the species and gratifying the sensual appetites of men. Women's education from early childhood corresponded to the rest of their treatment. The whole instruction was left to the mother and the nurses, through whose means they obtained, perhaps, a smattering of letters and were taught to spin and weave and similar female avocations. Hence, there were no scientific or learned ladies with the exception of mistresses or courtesans. Greek and Roman women during the classical period had little to no legal options, while in contrast, Etruscan women had the ability to inherit their own property and keep their surname. In addition, Etruscan women are also depicted frequently within a religious context. The Etruscans were renowned in ancient times for their knowledge of the spiritual world. The Romans held Etruscan religious advisors in high esteem and consulted them regularly on matters of politics and military strategy. The Etruscans had their own female deities, and they also readily incorporated female Greek deities into their existing pantheon. Italy magazine also points out that all Mediterranean cultures had female religious figures, but figures like Vestal virgins and priestesses were not often depicted or paid attention to by the Romans and Greeks and were rather tucked away. For a long time, the attitude of Greek and Roman men suppressed many depictions of women in their artwork pre-Hellenistic period. Many women who were actually depicted alongside men in statuary were depicted to be in the process of being sexually assaulted. This theme is prominent in their mythology, where Zeus/Jupiter is often the perpetrator of a great many unwanted advances and impregnations of women. Nymphs is also a common visual, as is Hades' abduction and rape of Persephone. Otherwise, depictions of women were not as common, and many were modestly clothed. It was projecting the message that women were objects to be conquered and taken when men wanted, that if they wished to be sensual and confident of their own nudity, of their own volition, that was something that was far less appealing. Such confidence may lead to a sense of self and independence. As the visual arts history states, a conjunction of social and aesthetic concerns may account for the rarity of female nudes in earlier periods of Greek art, as well as the particular form they took when they eventually appeared in the 4th century. Few civilized societies have been so completely male-dominated as that of ancient Greece. Laws made this abundantly clear. Adultery, for example, was defined one-sidedly as intercourse between a married man and a man who was not her husband. Rape as an offense against a woman's husband, father, or guardian, not herself. Confined to child-rearing and household maintenance. The book goes on to explain how husbands went off and cheated with whoever they pleased. Oftentimes that meant prostitutes, and that wives were caretakers and not necessarily partners. No elderly women or little girls were depicted in the artwork of the Romans and Greeks pre-Hellenistic period, just strong, athletic men who were supposed to represent Greek and Roman men. Portrait sculptures of real living men were often of older, prominent men. These portraits were called veristic portraits, such as the head of a Republican priest, which focused on exaggerating his features. In this case, a man of his age in a priesthood position was a sign of something to be admired. Never were elderly women featured in such a way with such reverence pre-Hellenistic period. However, there was a cultural shift during what is known as the Hellenistic period. During this period, the capital cities grew into large and wealthy centers of trade, industry, learning, and artistic activity. Alexandria in Egypt, Seleucid in the Tigris, Antioch near the coast of Syria, and later Pergamum in Asia Minor. And their influence extended to the Greek cities of the Western Mediterranean, to Etruria, and to Rome. Small, tightly knit, heroically competitive societies had given way to vast, amorphous cosmopolitan urban centers, predominantly commercial and manufacturing. During this era, both Stoicism and Epicureanism were established, two important philosophies that have gone on to influence people today. Stoics believed in equality for both men and women, arguing that sexual inequality being, in their view, contrary to the laws of nature. Also a shift in the art sphere that was representative of a widely shifting mindset and approach towards things in daily life. Artists wanted to explore and represent what they saw, as opposed to mostly sticking to idealized versions of handsome, heroic Greek and Roman men. Hellenistic art saw a turn from the idealistic, perfected, calm and composed figures of classical Greek art to a style dominated by realism and the depiction of emotion. The female nude also became more popular, and art in general became more erotic. The dominant ideals of Hellenistic art were those of sensuality and passion. Suddenly, people of all ages and social statuses were also being depicted in the art of the Hellenistic age. One of the best examples of a more accurate and representative depiction of women is the well-known Old Market Woman. The Met Museum website clarifies that though this is titled the Old Market Woman, it's most likely an aged courtesan on her way to the festival of Dionysus, the god of wine. The items she's holding, the wine and the chickens, are likely offerings or provisions for a long day of celebration, and the ivy wreath is a symbol associated with the wine god. This particular statue may have been intended for a sanctuary of Dionysus. The Roman copy could have decorated a garden. Previously, before the Hellenistic period, this would have been unheard of. Elderly women were not cherished or admired like that of older men. To make statues out of subject matter like this wouldn't have been seen as a valid option. Old women were not what men wanted to see or the image of their culture that they wanted to project. It's such a stark contrast to the period in classical Greece, which men found things like this to be distasteful, preferring to ignore women as individuals and slandering other cultures in which women were more prominent in the social sphere. Though society during the Hellenistic period was still patriarchal, the art was reflective of women's shifting roles. Women had more influential and prominent roles in politics. Phyle of Priene was a woman who held office and the first woman to build an aqueduct in Hellenistic Greece, a role usually done by magistrates. In addition, in Alexandria, royal women did not have to gain permission from their husbands to take care of legal issues. Other women during the Hellenistic period have been recorded to be able to hold property and slaves as well as have economic freedom as they became increasingly more wealthy. There was also a step forward in education where women were allowed to be educated, and because of this there was an influx of female poets, philosophers, etc., and women also began entering athletic sphere with foot racing and horse racing. In Etruscan society, women were more equal with men, which we can see in what they chose to immortalize through their artwork, like in the sarcophagus with a reclining couple. It's fascinating how a society's view on women can impact the amount and level of representation that they receive. It's also fascinating to see how the new ideas, philosophies, and inclusion of women in the social sphere during the Hellenistic period influenced their art, exemplified through the piece Old Market Women. Women were more included in artwork during the Hellenistic period by the Romans and Greeks because women were seen as more valued members of society. And although it was still a patriarchal society, there were steps taken towards the right direction. Thank you for listening to my video. Here are the sources that I used for this video.